I bought the Pixel 10 on the day it was announced, so I've now had it for over 4 months, and I've been using it as my daily driver for the last 2 months. In this video, I'll tell you what I like, what I don't, and whether it's worth the upgrade, especially if you're coming from an older Pixel. Let's start with design. To be honest, there isn't much of a change from last year's Pixel 9, but I really like that design, so this isn't necessarily a bad thing. The 10 has almost the exact same dimensions as last year's base Pixel, apart from being 0.1mm thicker for a slightly larger battery. That makes it 6 grams heavier, but it's not noticeable in the hand. It has almost identical matte side rails, apart from the SIM tray is now moved to the top of the device, and the rails are now marketed as spacecraft grade aluminium. Whatever that means, it doesn't really impact how they feel, but maybe they're a bit more durable. Round the back, we have the same design of camera island as the Pixel 9, but the Pixel 10 is rocking an extra telephoto camera, giving it a slightly larger camera island and glass section covering the lenses. This, plus the slight difference in thickness, mean the Pixel 9's case won't fit on the Pixel 10, so you can't reuse your old case here if you decide to upgrade. Both sides of the phone are protected with Gorilla Glass Victus 2, which should be scratch resistant, but in my experience it's not as good as Apple's newest Ceramic Shield 2. I haven't scratched the screen yet, but with Victus 2 it's usually only a matter of time before micro scratches appear, so I still recommend using a screen protector. I actually managed to get a micro scratch on the glass covering the cameras. It's barely visible, but it's easier than ever to scratch this now that the glass section is so much bigger. This vibrant indigo blue that I have is one of 4 colours, along with frost, lemongrass and obsidian. I'd recommend steering clear of obsidian if fingerprints annoy you, as they're way more noticeable on that darker, glossy glass. However, I don't really have to worry about fingerprints, as I always use a case with my phones. And speaking of cases, I picked up the official Indigo PixelSnap case from Google. We'll talk more about PixelSnap, which is Google's magnetic wireless charging technology, a bit later, but this case feels well built, finding a good balance of being rigid enough to protect the phone, but flexible enough to make it easy to take off the phone whenever you want to appreciate the design. It feels and looks great in the hand, doesn't add too much bulk to the phone, and it maintains the tactile feel of the Pixel's buttons. However, it's made of a smooth silicone feeling material, which feels quite a bit less grippy than the past official Pixel cases that I've used. Basically, if you're prone to dropping your phone, you'd be better with a different case, as this one also doesn't have any sort of dedicated drop protection for the corners of the phone. But the main reason I'm not going to recommend you buy this case is the price. This case costs £50, which is actually mad, especially when you can get a perfectly good third-party case that protects the phone to the same extent, or even better, with wireless magnetic charging functionality for between £10 and £20. Moving on to the display, and there isn't much of a spec difference compared to the Pixel 9. Both are 6.3-inch 1080p panels with a pixel density of 422 pixels per inch that can dynamically switch between a 60 and 120Hz refresh rate. The only real change is the Pixel 10 hits 3000 nits of peak brightness over the 2700 nits on the 9, but in real use, you'd be hard pressed to notice a difference. And fundamentally, they both have great screens that can get bright enough for pretty much any situation. However, there are a couple of minor things that bother me here. Firstly, I'm disappointed Google still hasn't used LTPO tech here, which would allow the screen to drop to 1Hz when showing certain content to save battery, which is something both the similarly priced Samsung Galaxy S25 and iPhone 17 can do. Secondly, compared to those phones, the bezels on the Pixel 10 look quite large, which makes the design feel a little bit less clean, although this is a minor gripe because it's not an issue in everyday use. Another thing to note is that with last year's Pixel 9, I had a green line pop up on the screen very briefly a couple of times, which I mentioned in my long-term review. Fortunately, I haven't seen any similar issues on the Pixel 10 screen yet, which is a good sign. Under the screen, we get an ultrasonic fingerprint sensor, which is just as fast and consistent as the Pixel 9's from last year. Moving to the top and bottom of the phone, in my testing side by side, the stereo speakers on the Pixel 10 don't get up to quite the same volume as the Pixel 9, but at maximum volume they offer slightly better clarity than last year's Pixel. But there have been a few moments when I've been listening to a podcast around the house using the speakers on the 10 and wishing I had a little bit more volume. In terms of performance, I haven't noticed a significant difference from the Pixel 9 in everyday use. Swiping through the OS, opening apps, and taking photos feels near identical, likely helped by the fact both phones have 12GB of RAM. This year, Google moved their chip manufacturing to TSMC, where past Tensor chips were manufactured by Samsung. TSMC produce Apple's beastly A series of chips for the iPhone, so I, along with probably many of you out there, were hoping for some significant performance gains with the Tensor G5 and the Pixel 10. Unfortunately, these haven't really materialized at all. In my tests using Geekbench, the G5's CPU benchmarks about 9.2% faster in single core and 17% faster in multi-core performance, which is definitely an improvement, but still falls far short of other chips out there, such as the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 in my OnePlus 15. The Snapdragon chip achieves a frankly ridiculous 102% better single core score and 129% better multi-core score over the Tensor, which is crazy considering I picked up the OnePlus 15 for less than I bought the Pixel 10 for. GPU performance is even worse, as without going into too much technical detail, Google moved to a new GPU architecture with the G5 and didn't release the phone with the latest GPU drivers, meaning compatibility across apps and games wasn't optimized. Weirdly, in Geekbench, the Pixel 9 outperforms the 10 in the GPU benchmark by 107%, but I think this is down to a complete lack of optimization in Geekbench with the Pixel 10, as this isn't really reflected in real-world performance. In Delta Force, the Pixel 9 and 10 pretty much perform the same, achieving a maximum of 60 frames per second, which is sometimes a little bit stuttery. In contrast, the OnePlus 15 can play the game at higher graphics quality at a very smooth 120 frames per second, and the gameplay feel and experience is just far better. Basically, the Pixel 10 is perfectly smooth for everyday tasks, but if you plan to do anything graphically intensive with your phone, I would strongly consider something like the much more powerful OnePlus 15 or even the iPhone 17. It's just disappointing that Google are asking for flagship prices while offering significantly worse performance, especially if you're a mobile gamer. Aside from raw performance, I continue to love the overall Pixel software experience. It just works well as a phone for the basics, which is what most people will likely care about. Apps open quickly, the operating system is clean and simple, and useful Pixel exclusive features like Now Playing, which identifies songs that are playing around you and shows them on the screen, are things I actively miss when I'm using a non-Pixel phone. The Pixel 10 does add a few new tricks, like Magic Queue, which is designed to surface info from your Google Apps at the right time, like showing booked flight details on the screen while you're on a call with an airline, for example. I've only noticed this working once, considering I've been using the phone for months at this point and have only noticed this once. I'm not sure how useful it actually is. Something that is useful though is the new ability to airdrop files between the Pixel 10 and Apple devices. It works surprisingly well and I've used it a lot over the past month or so. There's a lot of speculation about whether Apple will eventually block this, but I'm hoping they don't, as it's a great feature for people like me who have both Apple and Pixel products. This is currently only available on the Pixel 10 series. Apart from this, Gemini, Google's AI assistant, continues to get better, and I find myself using it frequently on a daily basis for setting reminders, asking information about something, or helping me solve an issue using Gemini Live. The problem with all of the previously mentioned features is that Gemini is on almost every phone now, and features like Magic Queue and AirDrop likely won't stay exclusive to the 10 for long. If you just want the Pixel experience, the Pixel 9 or 9a gets you 99% of the way there. My main software gripe is the lack of customization options. For example, you still can't remove the at a glance widget. You can disable it, but the day and date still take up the space where the widget usually sits. You also still can't remove the Google search bar at the bottom of the home screen. I actually use the search bar quite a lot, but I think we should have the option to remove these from the home screen if we want to. Google has also recently introduced themes to the phone, but only 3, and they're all themes related to the latest Wicked film. This is super limited compared to Samsung, who have a full marketplace for custom themes. The only real software issue I've noticed is delayed notifications. For example, when I need to complete multi-factor authentication using an authenticator app, the notification comes through within seconds on my iPhone, but it's frequently been delayed up to 2 minutes on my Pixel 10. This could be a real issue if you're waiting on a particularly important notification. Next, let's talk battery and charging. The standout feature here is PixelSnap, Google's take on Apple's MagSafe, so magnetic wireless charging built right into the phone. This is cool because Google is the first major Android manufacturer to add magnets into the phone itself. Since it works with MagSafe accessories like wallets and power banks, it's making the Pixel 10 seem like a compelling option for anyone considering moving to Android from iPhone. With Qi 2, the 10 can wirelessly charge at up to 15 watts and can go up to 30 watts when wired charging with Google's 30 or 45 watt chargers. But in my testing with this Ugreen 100 watt PPS charger, I achieved a maximum charging speed of just under 27 watts. Compared to the 120 watt charging on the OnePlus 15, this is very slow, but it hasn't really bothered me in real use as I charge my phone overnight and it's rarely run out of battery before the end of the day. And speaking of battery, while the Pixel 10 is nowhere near a battery king, I think the battery life is more than good enough for the majority of people. It has a larger 4970 mAh battery over the Pixel 9's 4700 mAh cell, and I noticed a slight improvement over the 9. I've been averaging about 4.5 hours of screen on time with 30% left at the end of a 15-hour day. So I reckon I could probably achieve around 6 to 7 hours of screen on time if I use 100% of the battery. And that's with my usual mix of scrolling social media, messaging on WhatsApp, navigating using maps on my commute, and listening to music and podcasts on Spotify, usually while connected to headphones or a speaker via Bluetooth. I also have my OnePlus Watch 2 constantly connected via Bluetooth as well. I usually have a decent mix of Wi-Fi and mobile data usage, and while the phone is definitely going to last longer on Wi-Fi, it feels a lot more efficient on mobile data than Pixels have been in the past. So if your phone usage is similar to mine, you can expect to get similar results. The cameras are where things get interesting. The Pixel 10 adds an extra 10.8 megapixel 5x telephoto camera to the back of the phone this year, but at the expense of the other rear-facing cameras. Strangely, on paper, the Pixel 10 has quite severely downgraded main and ultra-wide cameras from the Pixel 9, with actually using the same main and ultra-wide sensors from the much more budget Pixel 9a. This in itself isn't necessarily a terrible decision, as the 9a's cameras largely produce pretty good results, but it means that both these sensors provide less megapixels, and more importantly are quite a bit smaller than the ones on the 9. Fundamentally, in my experience, the main and ultra-wide cameras are not really noticeably worse in good lighting conditions, but a difference can be seen in low light conditions and also in video performance. The telephoto produces good results in good lighting and is fine for social media posts, but the 10.8 megapixel resolution and tiny sensor mean it's not really good for anything more than that, and really falls apart in low light. But I think for most situations, I prefer having the versatility of the extra telephoto over the larger sensors of the 9. However, it would have been nice to keep the Pixel 9 sensors and have the additional telephoto added on, as it does feel like a downgrade for the same amount of money, which makes it feel like it's worse value this year. The front-facing camera is the same 10.5 megapixel sensor as on the Pixel 9, so the results are very similar, which is basically absolutely fine for selfies as it gets reasonably wide. As I hinted at earlier, for video, while you can mostly get similar results for basic videos of pets and family from the Pixel 10, if you want the best results for video, the Pixel 9's larger sensors actually make a more significant difference here. The stabilization on the Pixel 10 is again very similar to the Pixel 9, which is pretty decent for most situations, apart from in low light situations where you can notice some digital stabilization jitters. I'm not going to go into too much more detail on the cameras in this video, as I've already created an in-depth camera comparison between the Pixel 9 and Pixel 10, which I'll link up here somewhere. Fundamentally, as is usually the case on this channel, the price and value of the Pixel 10 is always a huge deciding factor on whether I can recommend it. The 10 retails at £800 or $800 US, but I've already seen it down to £600 in sales. In a vacuum, it's a solid phone that has a really nice software experience, some sweet added features such as PixelSnap and AirDrop compatibility, and some really versatile cameras. However, I can't review this phone in a vacuum because, compared to other Pixels, the Pixel 9 gives you 95% of the features of this phone, including very similar performance, while also giving you cameras that are actually better than the 10s in some ways. Also, I'm quite confident that many of the Pixel 10 exclusive software features will come to the 9 eventually. And if you use a case with the 9, you can pick up one with MagSafe support, so you can effectively get the same functionality as PixelSnap. The Pixel 9 can be picked up for a fair bit cheaper than the Pixel 10 as well, so it's looking like the better value at the moment. The Pixel 9a is another good option too, as you get the full Pixel experience for way less money, along with 2 of the 3 cameras from the Pixel 10 and a larger battery. Aside from pixels though, another reason the Pixel 10 feels like poor value is that it starts at 128GB of storage, but retails for the same price as the iPhone 17, which starts at 256GB of storage. Obviously the Pixel 10 can be had for a lot less via discounts, so basically please don't buy this phone at full price, but at £600 or $600, I'd still consider it. But if you are keen to buy a Pixel, I'd honestly save some money and go for the Pixel 9 or 9a, as in my opinion there just aren't enough added features on the Pixel 10 to justify the higher price. If you can't live without a telephoto camera, then the Pixel 9 Pro might even be a better option, as it has better cameras all round than the 10 and can be bought for a similar price. If you're interested in picking up the Pixel 10 or would rather opt for one of the other phones that I mentioned, then I've linked them all down below. But what do you think of the Pixel 10 this year? Let me know down in the comments. If you want to see a more in-depth comparison of the cameras on the Pixel 9 versus the Pixel 10, I'd recommend watching this video next. And if you want to see my long-term review of the Pixel 9, you can watch that right here. Cheers.